The drums of Ibeku had always spoken, in joy, in birth, in the coming of rain. But that morning they were mute. The air hung heavy, as if even the wind had lost its courage. Crows circled above the chief's compound, their cries sharp and restless. Inside, women sat on the ground, their wrappers tied tight, their eyes swollen with tears. Chief Olumide was gone. The man whose voice once carried across markets and meetings now lay still, wrapped in white cloth, surrounded by silence that even the ancestors could taste. "Hey!" an old woman cried, beating her chest. "The Iroko has fallen!" Men shook their heads. Some whispered prayers, others only sighed. Even the goats tied near the fence refused to bleat, as though the whole land knew that a great spirit had departed. Yet behind the mourning, a strange quiet stirred, a silence that was not of grief alone. It carried something else, something darker. The talking drums, carved by the elders' fathers, did not sing for him. Not a single beat rose to announce his journey to the ancestors. That was the sign, that something deeper than death had touched Ibeku. For when the drums refused to speak, the people knew the truth. The spirit of the land was uneasy. And though the chief's body lay cold, his shadow was not done walking. Mama Eve stood a little apart from the crowd, her wrapper tied firm around her waist, her gray hair wrapped in a deep blue scarf. The others wept loudly, but her eyes, sharp as the harmattan wind, searched every corner of the compound. She had buried truth before. Now she feared she must dig it up again. She muttered softly, "The river that forgets its source will soon dry." A young woman beside her turned. "Mama, what did you say?" Mama Ife's gaze did not shift. "Nothing, child. I only spoke to the spirits that walk with me." Her words floated through the air like palm smoke, settling heavy on those who heard them. The men who had come to mourn shuffled uneasily. They knew Mama Ife's tongue carried weight. In the days of the chief's youth, she had been the one to guard the sacred calabash, keeper of stories older than their lineage. Now, watching Madame Risi command the mourners with her crocodile tears, she felt the ancestors stir. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. She raised her walking stick, pressing it into the dust. "If truth sleeps too long," she whispered, "lies will build a palace over its grave." Her words, though quiet, rolled through the compound like distant thunder. Somewhere in the wind, it felt as though the ancestors had begun to listen again. Night wrapped Ibeku in a cloak of silence. The drums had stopped, the mourners gone, but Tunde lay awake beneath the rustle of the old Iroko outside. The moon hung low, pale like a weary spirit. His heart felt heavy, not just with grief, but with the weight of something unfinished. He turned toward the window. The wind brushed against it gently, whispering, "Tu, tu," as though someone unseen called his name. Tunde. He sat up sharply. "Who's there?" His voice trembled, half from fear, half from longing. Only the wind answered, carrying the faint scent of palm wine and the sound of distant owls. He remembered his father's voice from years ago, steady, deep, filled with warning. "There will be a time, my son, when truth will knock at your door. When that day comes, open it with courage, not anger." Tunde's eyes drifted to the old wooden chest beside the bed. It was carved with symbols of the moon and river spirits, his father's handwork. His fingers brushed over it, tracing the faded marks. The lock clicked softly, as if it had waited for this night. Inside lay an envelope, browned by time and sealed with wax. His name was written in his father's hand, "For Tunde, when the time is right." He hesitated, feeling the air shift around him. The flame of the lantern flickered, stretching shadows across the wall. Somewhere in the night a dog barked, then went silent. He whispered, "Is this the time, Papa?" No answer came, yet the rustling of the Iroko leaves grew louder, almost like the murmurs of a restless council. The ancestors were stirring. Tunde held the letter to his chest and closed his eyes. "If truth is waiting," he said softly, "then let it find me ready." The wind sighed through the compound, carrying the promise of storms, not of rain, but of revelation. By dawn, the village court was already alive. Traders closed their stalls early, drummers paused their rhythms, and even the goats seemed to watch in silence. The people of Ebeku came as if summoned by the ancestors themselves. The courthouse, built of red earth and wood, stood like a shrine where truth and deceit would dance before the gods. Elders filled the front benches, their faces carved with wisdom and waiting. Women with headscarves whispered behind their fans, their voices carrying rumors like smoke. Children climbed trees for a better view. Outside, palm wine sellers shouted joyfully, "Justice brings thirst, come drink!" The air smelled of roasted corn and secrets. When the gavel struck, it sounded like a drumbeat from another world. Thum, thum, thum. The courtroom grew still. Madame Risi entered, veiled in black, her steps slow but proud. Her lawyer followed like a shadow, carrying papers that could twist truth into shapes. Tunde sat across from her, calm but firm, his eyes refusing to meet hers. The people murmured, "Ah, see the son of the lion and the widow of silk." One seeks truth, the other seeks gold. As the hearing began, each voice in that hall became part of the performance. Words flew like arrows, some dipped in honey, others in poison. The court had become a theater, a stage where grief wore costumes and lies learned how to bow. But above them all, the gavel echoed again, steady as fate, reminding everyone that destiny was still listening. The night was heavy with rain. Wind howled through the compound like an old spirit mourning its child. Inside Chief Olumide's study, the air was thick with dust, secrets, and silence. The shelves still carried his scent, a blend of old books, palm oil, and memories long buried. Tunde's hand trembled as he brushed away cobwebs from the desk. Beneath a pile of faded ledgers, he found it, a brown envelope sealed with wax, marked in his father's own handwriting. "For my son, when I am gone." His heart pounded. The paper smelled of dust and regret, of promises kept too long. Mama Eve stood at the doorway, her head wrapped in deep blue cloth. "Ah, Tunda," she whispered, her voice carrying the weight of generations. "That letter carries more than ink. It carries the voice of the dead. Be careful when you let the ancestors speak." Tunda turned to her, confusion in his eyes. "Auntie, should I not read what he left for me? His truth may be the only weapon I have." She shook her head slowly. "In our land, a man does not open the words of the dead until the gods themselves give permission. Some truths walk ahead of time and crush the living who chase them too early." The rain struck harder against the windows, as though the ancestors themselves were listening. Tunde held the letter close to his chest, his mind a storm of fear and resolve. "Then let the gods decide," he murmured, slipping the envelope inside his coat. Mama Eve's eyes followed him, her heart uneasy. "The river that forgets its source will dry," she said softly. "But even the river must wait for the rain before it flows again." That night, Tunde lay awake, the sound of thunder echoing in his ears. Each rumble felt like his father calling from beyond, urging him toward a truth the living had long buried. And though he closed his eyes, the envelope's presence burned against his chest, silent, waiting, alive. The room was silent except for the hiss of the lantern flame. The brown envelope lay on the table like a sleeping snake, harmless until touched. Tunde's fingers trembled as he broke the seal. The paper crackled softly, but its words roared like thunder in his chest. "My son," the letter began, Chief Alamide's shaky handwriting bleeding across the page. "If these words reach your hands, it means my tongue has grown cold in death. I write not to ask for forgiveness, but to confess before the gods who see all. I wronged your mother. I let Risi's lies blind me, and in my weakness, I signed away what was yours." Tunde's eyes blurred with tears. Each word struck him like a drumbeat of shame and truth. Mama Ifa covered her mouth, whispering, "The spirits do not sleep. They wait for the day a man's tongue speaks what his heart buried." The air thickened, as though the ancestors themselves leaned in to listen. The letter continued. "Risi made me believe your mother betrayed me. I cast her out, and when she died, peace left my house. I sought riches, but my heart rotted in guilt. Let it be known that my blood Tunde is the rightful heir to the Olumide name. Let no falsehood stand above the truth." When Tunde finished reading, the paper slipped from his hand. The room grew heavy. Even the walls seemed to breathe with sorrow. No one spoke. The truth sat among them like a spirit, unseen but deeply felt. Reese's eyes widened as the last words echoed through the room. Her breath caught in her throat. Her proud shoulders trembled. The letter's truth wrapped around her like a python tightening its grip. You lie," she stammered, pointing at Tunde, but her voice broke like glass. "He wanted this. Her words never finished." She clutched her chest, gasping for air. Her golden bangles clinked against the floor as her knees buckled. The crowd outside the window cried out. "The gods have spoken!" One woman shouted. Mama Ife whispered a prayer. "May her spirit find the road she built with her own hands." The road she built with her own hands. Tunde stood still, his face cold as stone. He did not move to help her. Even compassion knew when to stay silent. Justice had come, not by sword or court, but by the breath of truth itself. And as Reese's body lay still, the people murmured, "The ancestors never forget." When calm finally returned, Judge Follerin rose from his seat. His voice was steady, but his eyes carried the weight of what he had witnessed. "Today," he said, "truth has walked into this court, but justice must still find its feet." The villagers leaned closer, their breaths held in the thick silence. "The law," he continued, "will take its course, but what the spirits have judged, no man can overturn." He struck the gavel gently, once, twice, as if calling the gods to bear witness. "Let no man mock the truth," he said. "For lies may travel fast, but truth always walks with the ancestors." Heads bowed across the room. Some bowed in relief, others in fear. Outside, the village bell rang, and the story of the Olumide family began to weave itself into the fabric of legend, a tale the children would whisper by moonlight for generations. Dark clouds gathered above the courthouse, like angry spirits holding back their tears. The wind whispered through the palm trees, carrying the scent of rain and judgment. The villagers lingered outside, their faces pale with unease. "Even the heavens are waiting," an old man muttered, staring at the sky. Thunder rumbled in the distance, slow and deep, like the voice of a god thinking aloud. The earth felt heavy beneath their feet, as though every step carried the weight of what had been revealed. Tunde stood beneath the gray sky, his heart torn between grief and relief. The world felt different now, quieter, yet alive with the whispers of those unseen. The heavens refused to smile that day, as if mourning the cost of truth, for even justice in the land of men demanded blood. The courthouse was filled long before the sun reached its peak. Every seat groaned under the weight of anxious bodies, elders in worn agbadas whose faces carried years of judgment, women clutching rosaries and whispering prayers, and children peeking through cracked windows, hungry for a glimpse of truth. The air was thick, alive with the hum of gossip and fate. An old man muttered under his breath, "Today the gods will balance their scales." Another replied, "If lies have roots, may they burn before sunset." Even before the gavel struck, judgment had already settled in the hearts of those gathered. The court was not merely a room. It was a shrine where truth and deceit came to wrestle before men and spirits alike. When Madame Reese entered, all eyes turned. She was draped in flowing black lace, her face half hidden behind a veil heavy enough to hide a world of deceit. The gold on her wrists jingled softly, a mockery of mourning. "Even death must be performed well," she whispered to her lawyer, her lips curling into a faint smile. Her perfume, rich and thick, spread through the hall like false incense. She dabbed at her eyes with a white handkerchief, but no tear dared fall. The villagers murmured among themselves. "She mourns the chief with her tongue," one woman said quietly, "but not with her heart." Reese sat gracefully, adjusting her veil, pretending grief while her gaze swept over the faces in the crowd, searching for weakness, calculating her next move. In her mind, the trial was not about justice but survival. Her lawyer, a tall man with a silver tie and pride thick as palm oil, rose to speak. "My lord," he began, bowing slightly toward Judge Folarin. "This letter, this so-called confession, could easily be forged. Ink can lie. Words can be shaped to destroy a name." Gasps echoed through the room. But from the back, an old woman chuckled bitterly. "Ink can lie," she said, "but spirits do not." The murmurs grew, a wave of disbelief rolling through the hall. Some swore they heard faint laughter, not from men but from the ancestors themselves. It was said that when truth hides too long, the spirits mock those who try to bury it again. The lawyer's words hung in the air, thin and trembling, as if afraid of the truth standing beside them. Tunde rose slowly. His legs were unsteady, but his eyes burned with the fire of a sun denied his name for too long. "Your Honor," he said, his voice low but clear. "That letter, I do not need proof of ink. I lived its truth." The courtroom fell still. Even the fan above seemed to pause. He looked toward Reese, whose face hid behind her veil. "For years I was told I was nothing, that my mother's love was a sin, that my father's home was not mine. But I know the sound of his voice. I know the weight of his guilt. This letter was not written by hands alone. It was written by a spirit seeking rest. His voice carried through the air like a hymn, one born of pain and dignity. It echoed against the walls, finding its place in every heart that still believed in justice. He continued softly, his eyes glistening. "My mother, she was not a woman of war. Even when they wronged her, she prayed for peace. When father turned his back, she said, 'Let love guide him home.' Her kindness was her strength, but it was also her curse." The courtroom was silent. Even the rain that had been tapping against the roof seemed to hold its breath. Tunde's voice wavered slightly. "She told me, never fight evil with anger. Let truth be your sword. Today, I lift that sword not to wound, but to free us all from lies." An elder in the corner whispered, "His mother speaks through him." And for a brief moment, every person in that courtroom, even those who doubted, felt the air shift. Justice, they sensed, had begun to move. The air in the courtroom trembled with silence after Tunde's words. No one dared to speak. Even the walls seemed to listen. His final voice broke through the stillness, deep and unwavering. "If truth costs me everything," he said, his eyes fixed on the judge, "then let it take all. But let lies cost their owners too." The words cut through the air like a blade blessed by ancestors. For a moment, he stood taller than every pillar in the hall, a young man carrying the crown of truth on bare shoulders. His voice was not loud, but it echoed in every ear, whispering of justice long delayed. The villagers nodded slowly, their hearts heavy with pride and fear. A woman muttered, "That boy has spoken with his father's spirit." Judge Folarin sat unmoving, his gavel resting gently beside him like a sacred staff passed down from wise forefathers. He looked not at Tunde nor at Reese, but at the air between them, as if seeing the unseen spirits of those wronged and those still watching. He had lived long enough to know that justice was not just about laws written on paper, but also about the heartbeat of the land, the whispers of the ancestors, and the balance that kept the world upright. His voice was deep, but soft with sorrow. "I am not here to please men," he said. "I am here to keep peace between the living and the dead. Let truth speak, and let justice breathe." A hush swept through the room. Even the wind that crept through the open windows seemed to wait. Finally, he rose and lifted his gavel. "By law and by spirit," he said, "I declare Tunde Olumide the rightful heir to his father's name and home." The crowd exhaled as one, a sound like chains falling to the ground. But before the cheer could rise, the judge's voice followed, calm but firm. "Madam Reese," he said, turning toward her, "you have wronged both the living and the dead. Yet our land teaches Ubuntu, that even those who fall deserve a hand to rise. You shall receive a modest stipend, not as reward, but as mercy. Let your days ahead remind you that wealth without truth is dust." A soft murmur spread across the hall. not of protest, but of understanding. Mercy, after all, was also an act of strength. Just then, thunder cracked across the heavens. It was as if the ancestors themselves had struck the sky with their drums. The villagers gasped, some bowing their heads. "Olodumare has spoken," an elder whispered. Rain began to fall, washing down the courthouse steps. The drops hit the ground with rhythm, cleansing the dust of deceit. The wind carried the scent of wet earth, a sign of renewal, of stories ending and beginning anew. The people said the rain was no accident. It was the world itself taking a deep breath after too many lies. Madame Risi stood slowly, her veil now clinging to her wet face. She no longer hid behind it. Her eyes were hollow, her pride drained away like water through cracked clay. No more words, no more pretense. Only tears, sharp and burning, sliding down her cheeks as she bowed her head to defeat. Across the room, Tunde watched in silence. He did not smile. He did not gloat. Victory, he knew, carried its own burden. His heart was not dancing. It was kneeling, thanking the spirits for justice and praying for peace. For justice and praying for peace. Outside, the thunder rolled again, but this time, it sounded less like anger, and more like applause from the ancestors. The villagers left the courthouse in hushed groups, their sandals sinking into the soft, rain-washed earth. No one shouted, no one laughed. Yet in every whisper, the same words danced like wind through the trees. This was the day truth wore its crown. Old men leaned on their walking sticks, nodding as though confirming a prophecy fulfilled. Mothers held their children close, saying, "Remember this day, my child. It is not the loud who win, but the just." From that day on, the story of Tunde and Madame Risi became a tale for evening fires, a story told not in anger, but in wisdom. When night came, the rain quieted to a soft hum upon the rooftops. The town exhaled, its heartbeat steady once more. Law had spoken, but so had the spirits. Justice had not come with vengeance, but with grace. Even the gods, watching from their high places, saw that truth could triumph without cruelty. In the distance, the courthouse lamps flickered and went out one by one, like candles fulfilling their duty. Peace returned to Ibeku, not the fragile kind that follows silence, but the lasting calm that follows understanding. The trial had ended, but the lesson was just beginning. By morning, the village awoke as if from a long, uneasy dream. Smoke rose from kitchens again. Traders reopened their stalls, spreading bright fabrics and laughing over the price of yams. Drummers beat soft rhythms in the market square, and the sound of life returned. People spoke of Tunde not as a conqueror, but as a restorer of balance. "He did not fight for land," one elder said. "He fought for his father's peace." The gossip that once poisoned the air now turned into proverbs for the next generation. A reminder that integrity may sleep, but it never dies. Days passed, and Tunde returned to the compound that once echoed with sorrow. The walls bore cracks, the doors hung loose, but his heart no longer trembled. He rolled up his sleeves and began to rebuild, brick by brick. Each wall he raised was not for pride or display, but for remembrance. Beside the courtyard, where his mother once sang to the evening birds, Tunde built a small school, a place where orphans and the poor could learn. "This," he said, smiling faintly, "is my father's true inheritance. Not gold, but hope." The villagers watched in awe as a house once divided became a home for many. Seasons turned, and the story of the Olumide family grew into a legend. At the village square, elders sat beneath the great Iroko tree and spoke to the young. "Chief Adewale smiles from the ancestors' home," they would say. "His son has given his dream to the world." The scholarship Tunde created became more than charity. It was justice reborn, a light carried into the lives of children born in shadow. And when those children learned to write their names, they wrote not just letters but the legacy of truth. Thus, in Ibeku, the tale of greed and grief ended not in bitterness, but in grace, proof that when truth wears its crown, peace follows behind it like a faithful servant. The path that leads to Madame Reese's hut is narrow and quiet, the kind where even the wind seems to walk softly. Tunde follows it often, a small basket of yam and dried fish balanced in his hands. The villagers whisper when they see him, but he pays them no mind. Each step is heavy, not with anger, but with memories that refuse to fade. When he reaches her door, Madame Reese sits outside, her back bent like a question mark time never answered. Her eyes, once proud and sharp, now carry the weight of days she cannot rewrite. Tunde places the basket beside her without a word. For a long moment, silence speaks louder than any greeting could. "I did not expect you today," she says finally, her voice fragile like dry leaves. "I did not plan to come," Tunde answers softly, "but the path keeps calling me here." Their eyes meet, not as enemies, not as mother and son, but as two souls learning how to breathe again. The air between them is thick, yet it slowly thaws with every visit. No forgiveness is spoken aloud, but it lingers in the space between their breaths. In the evenings, the sound of children's laughter begins to fill Madame Reese's hut. The woman once called Curse now gathers young girls beneath the flickering oil lamp. Her voice, once sharp with pride, now trembles with purpose. "My daughters," she begins, her gaze sweeping over their bright eyes. "Beauty is a bird that flies away when the wind changes. But wisdom, wisdom builds nests in your bones." The girls giggle, their eyes wide. She continues, "Greed devours even the sweetest fruit. I have seen it. I have lived it. But truth will set your spirit free." Her words rise and fall like the rhythm of a drum, carrying lessons wrapped in pain and healing alike. The same hands that once grasped for power now weave hope into young hearts. Madame Reese's stories are not just tales. They are prayers whispered into tomorrow. One night, as the moon climbs over Ibeku, the townsfolk gather near her hut. Some who once spat at her feet now sit cross-legged in the dirt, their eyes wet with quiet understanding. Madame Reese's voice fills the air. "To forgive," she says slowly, "is not to forget. It is to plant peace where pain once grew." The crowd hums in agreement. Old women nod, young men lower their heads. In that small clearing, forgiveness is no longer a word. It becomes rhythm. A heartbeat. A song. Drums echo softly in the background as if the land itself is breathing again. The broken circle of Ibeku mends itself, one story at a time. At dawn, Tunde sits beneath the ancient Iroko tree where his father once told stories of gods and men. The bark is old, the roots deep, the kind of tree that has seen both birth and burial. He holds a worn letter in his hands, the ink faded but the meaning alive. His father's words whisper from the past. "Justice is not the end of pain. Forgiveness is." The sun rises behind him, painting his shoulders in gold. He closes his eyes, feeling the warmth seep into the cracks of his spirit. For the first time in years, he breathes without the weight of bitterness. The wind stirs through the Iroko's leaves, carrying voices older than memory. The ancestors speak not in words, but in rhythm, a song that only hearts at peace can hear. "You have carried truth with clean hands," they murmur through the rustling branches. "You have walked through fire and did not let it burn your soul." Tunde bows his head. The earth beneath him feels alive, pulsing, forgiving, whole. And as the first light of morning touches the land of Ibeku, peace settles like soft rain upon hearts once hardened by grief. The story closes not with victory but with understanding that truth may wound, but only forgiveness can heal. The sun leaned gently over Ibeku, throwing long shadows beneath the ancient Iroko tree. The laughter of children danced through the air, wild, free, and unbothered by the ghosts of yesterday. They ran barefoot through the dust, chasing each other between the roots of the old tree that had seen too much and forgotten nothing. An old woman sat nearby, her gray scarf fluttering in the breeze. She watched them with eyes that carried stories. "Run, my children," she called softly, "for peace is the gift your fathers earned with pain." One curious boy paused and asked, "Mama, is it true that the woman who once stood before the court now teaches forgiveness?" The old woman smiled, her wrinkles deepening like river paths. "Yes, child. Madame Risi and Tunde, their story is no gossip. It is a lamp, and lamps are not made to be hidden." The children nodded, though they barely understood. Yet one day, when they too would face storms of pride, love, and truth, they would remember. For in Ebeku, the story of Tunde and Madame Risi would live forever, whispered by wind, told beside fires, carried in hearts. As night settled upon the village, the storyteller's voice rose deep and sure, carried by the rhythm of a distant drum. "When lies build a mansion," he began, "truth will always find the door." His audience sat still. The fire crackled as if in agreement. The court, he continued, his gaze sweeping over the crowd, delivered its judgment with gavel and law. But peace, peace, came only when hearts laid down their weapons. He lifted his staff toward the stars. "Remember this, my people. Justice that punishes may end a fight, but justice that forgives ends a war." The wind sighed through the palm trees. Somewhere a mother hushed her baby. The village listened, not to a story's end, but to wisdom returning home. And with a bow of his head, the storyteller concluded, "The story of Ebeku does not belong to the court, nor to the guilty, nor to the wronged. It belongs to truth, for truth never dies. It only waits for the courage to be spoken." When the morning came, the fields of Ebeku glowed golden beneath the new sun. The yam leaves shimmered with dew, alive again after long seasons of drought, as though the land itself had been forgiven. Tunda's name was spoken not in pity, but in honor. Madame Risi walked freely among her people, her steps slow but sure. Where bitterness once grew, friendship began to bloom. Forgiveness and redemption had taken root, strong as yam after the rains. Truth no longer stood as a sword drawn in anger. It had become an inheritance, passed from heart to heart, and justice, once feared like thunder, now felt like rain, soft, healing, and necessary. Ebeku was whole again, and as the drums of dusk began their slow, steady rhythm, the storyteller's final words echoed into the wind. In Africa, stories do not end, they rest, until the next heart is ready to listen.